She must have done this, Chloe whispered, her finger tracing the marks. Day after day. Trapped. As Liam photographed the scratches, Ben, who had been standing near the doorway, suddenly stiffened. Did you guys hear that? They all froze listening. Nothing but the distant creak of the old building, the faint whisper of the wind outside. What was it, Ben? Mark asked. A sigh. Like someone exhaling right behind me, Ben said, his eyes wide, scanning the empty corridor. He was the most grounded of them, the least prone to flights of fancy. His fear was infectious. They spent another few minutes in room 307, the cold seeping into their bones, the silence punctuated by their own strained breathing. The scratches on the wall seemed to pulse in the beam of their flashlights, a silent testament to Eleanor Vance's agony. As they turned to leave, Mark felt it. A light touch on his arm. Not a brush against his jacket, but a distinct, cold pressure like a hand. He spun around, his flashlight beam cutting through the darkness. Nothing. He looked at Liam, then Chloe, then Ben. They were all staring at him, their faces pale. Did you feel that, Mark? Liam whispered. Mark nodded, his throat tight. He hadn't imagined it. They exited room 307, the cold seeming to follow them. As they walked down the corridor, the closed doors seemed to press in on them, the silence now a suffocating weight. They heard faint sounds now. A distant moan. A soft, rhythmic tapping. A choked sob. Each sound too faint to pinpoint, too distinct to ignore. Let's just get out of here, Ben muttered, his usual bravado gone. They descended the stairs, the sounds growing fainter with each step. But the oppressive feeling, the sense of being watched, persisted. They reached the ground floor, the air warmer, the sunlight through the broken window a welcome sight. As they walked towards their entry point, Chloe suddenly stopped. She was staring at something on the floor near the main entrance. A single item. It was a doll. An old porcelain doll, dressed in a faded, tattered lace dress. Its eyes, large and glassy, were a startlingly vivid blue. It lay face up, its unblinking gaze fixed on the ceiling. It was the exact replica of the doll Mark had seen in the photograph of Eleanor Vance, a picture Chloe had shown them before their trip. A doll Eleanor had apparently cherished, a comfort in her final agonizing years. That's Eleanor's doll, Chloe whispered, her voice trembling. It was supposed to be in the Asylum museum, locked away. Mark knelt, examining the doll. It was impossibly cold, colder than the air in room 307. He reached out, his finger brushing against its porcelain cheek. The cold was immediate, bone-deep. And then he heard it. A faint, almost imperceptible whisper, directly in his ear. You left me. Mark recoiled, scrambling backwards, his heart hammering against his ribs. He looked at the others. Liam, Chloe, Ben. They were all staring at the doll, their faces etched with pure terror. They had heard it too. They ran. They didn't walk, they didn't hurry. They ran, bursting through the broken window, scrambling over the rusted fence, not stopping until they reached their car. They drove away from Blackwood Asylum, the crumbling brick edifice growing smaller in the rearview mirror, but its oppressive presence still felt tangible, a cold shadow clinging to them. They never returned to Blackwood. They never spoke of the doll or the whisper, or the cold that had seeped into their very souls. Mark tried to rationalize it. The stress, the old building, the power of suggestion. But the cold, the whisper, the unblinking blue eyes of that doll. They were too real. Months passed. The memories faded, replaced by the mundane rhythm of daily life. But sometimes, late at night, when the house was quiet and the world slept, Mark would feel a sudden, inexplicable chill. He'd find himself staring into the darkness, convinced he could see a pair of vivid blue eyes, unblinking, watching him. And in the deepest silence, he would swear he could hear a faint, mournful whisper, calling out to him from the edge of his sanity. The asylum, he realized, hadn't just held its patients within its walls. It had held their suffering, their despair, their lingering presence. And sometimes, those presences found a way to follow you home. The patient in room 307, Eleanor Vance, had never truly left Blackwood Asylum. She had merely found a new way to reach out, a new way to haunt the living. The air inside Blackwood Asylum hung heavy, thick with the scent of decay, dust, and something else. Something metallic, like old blood, and faintly sweet, like forgotten medicine. It was a smell that burrowed into the lungs and clung to clothing, a constant reminder of the building's grim history. Mark, a seasoned urban explorer with a decade of abandoned buildings under his belt, usually thrived in such environments. The thrill of discovery, the quiet reverence for forgotten spaces. But Blackwood was different. From the moment they'd breached the rusted gates, a palpable sense of oppression had settled over him. His team consisted of 3 others. Liam, the meticulous photographer, always seeking the perfect, haunting shot. Chloe, the amateur historian, obsessed with the stories behind the crumbling walls. And Ben, the pragmatic one, there mostly for the adrenaline and to keep the others grounded. They had heard the legends of Blackwood, of course. The brutal treatments, the experimental procedures, the patients who never left. But legends were just stories. Until they weren't. They entered through a broken window on the ground floor, flashlights cutting through the perpetual gloom. The main hall was vast, dust motes dancing in the weak shafts of sunlight that pierced the grimy windows. Peeling paint hung like decaying skin from the walls. Overturned wheelchairs lay scattered, silent witnesses to forgotten struggles. The silence was profound, broken only by the crunch of their boots on shattered glass and fallen plaster. Chloe, already engrossed, pointed to a faded sign. The admissions ward. Built 1903. Her voice, usually bright, was hushed. They spent hours on the lower floors, documenting the common areas, the dining hall with its long empty tables, the recreation room where a broken piano sat, its keys yellowed and silent. Each room held a chilling echo of its past. A child's drawing tacked to a bulletin board in what must have been a therapy room, a faded crayon rendering of a distorted face. A single rusted bed frame in a padded cell, the walls still bearing faint, desperate scratches. Ben, ever practical, kept an eye on their watches. "All right guys, let's hit the upper floors before it gets too dark. I want to be out of here before sundown." The staircase groaned under their weight, each step a protest against their intrusion. The second floor was largely similar to the first, more patient rooms, more echoes of despair. But as they ascended to the third floor, a subtle change occurred. The air grew colder, noticeably so, despite the oppressive summer heat outside. The silence deepened, becoming less peaceful and more menacing. "Anyone else feel that?" Liam whispered, pulling his jacket tighter. "Just an old building," Mark replied, though a shiver traced its way down his own spine. He checked his thermal reader. No anomalies. Just a general drop in temperature. The third-floor corridor stretched before them, a long, narrow tunnel of peeling wallpaper and closed doors. Unlike the lower floors, where many doors stood ajar, here most were tightly shut as if deliberately sealed. The numbers on the doors were faded, almost illegible. Chloe consulted her tablet, a digital map of the asylum she'd painstakingly researched. According to the old blueprints, this wing was for the more challenging cases. The ones deemed incurable. Her voice was barely a whisper. They moved slowly, flashlights sweeping, illuminating the grim details. A child's shoe, impossibly small, lying in the middle of the corridor. A single rusted spoon on a windowsill. Each item a tiny, unsettling clue to the lives once lived within these walls. They reached room 307. The door was slightly ajar, a sliver of darkness visible within. Unlike the other doors, this one seemed to exude a palpable sense of dread. The cold was strongest here, a frigid pocket of air that made their breath mist. "This is it," Chloe said, her voice barely audible. "This room. The records say a patient, a young woman named Eleanor Vance, was kept here. She was admitted in 1948. Severe catatonia, violent episodes. They tried everything. Electroshock lobotomy. She died here in 1952. Mark pushed the door open slowly, the hinges groaning in protest. The room was small, a single window looking out onto a brick wall. A rusted bed frame was bolted to the floor. The walls were bare, save for faint, almost erased pencil marks like tally marks. The air was heavy, stagnant, and intensely cold. "Look at this," Liam said, his voice hushed, shining his light on the wall beside the bed. There, etched deeply into the plaster, were hundreds of tiny, almost microscopic scratches. Not random. They seemed to form patterns, intricate, repetitive designs, like a child's frantic scribbling, but with an unsettling precision. He stared at it. The horse was still, silent. But the humming persisted. A soft, mournful tune. He reached out, touched the cold, splintered wood. The humming stopped abruptly. The silence returned. Heavy. Oppressive. He backed out of the room. His mind racing. He was tired. He was stressed. He was seeing things. Hearing things. He needed a break. But he couldn't afford to quit. Not yet. His shifts became a blur of paranoia. Every shadow seemed to move. Every creak of the building sounded like a footstep. He started talking to himself, whispering reassurances. "It's just the building. It's just the wind. He was in the old infirmary one night. Rows of rusted beds. A surgical light hanging precariously from the ceiling. He was checking the windows. He heard a distinct whisper. Right beside his ear. "Help me." Elias spun around. His flashlight beam darted wildly. Nothing. He was alone. He felt a cold breath on his neck. He stumbled back, hitting a bed frame. The whisper came again. Louder. More desperate. "Please, help me." He ran. He ran out of the infirmary. Down the corridor. His heart pounding. He didn't stop until he reached the main entrance. He leaned against the heavy steel door, gasping for breath. He looked back into the darkness of the asylum. He saw nothing, but he felt it. A presence. A multitude of presences. Watching him. Waiting. He started seeing them. Not clearly. Just glimpses. Fleeting figures in his peripheral vision. A white gown disappearing around a corner. A face pressed against a window, gone the moment he looked directly. He stopped questioning it. He just accepted it. They were there. The patients. Still trapped. Still suffering. One morning, as his shift was ending, he was in the central administration block. He was signing out. He looked at the old, dusty reception desk. And there it was. A single item. A small, tarnished silver locket. It lay on the desk. Open. Inside, a faded photograph. A young woman. Her eyes wide. Her hair disheveled. Her face thin. She looked terrified. Elias picked up the locket. It was cold. Impossibly cold. He looked at the photograph. He felt a profound sense of sadness. Of despair. He closed the locket. Put it in his pocket. He didn't know why. He just felt he had to. He drove home. The sun was rising. The world was waking up. But Elias felt no relief. The asylum had followed him. He could still smell the damp concrete. The old flowers. He could still hear the faint moans. The whispers. He went to his apartment. He didn't sleep. He sat in his armchair, staring at the wall. He took out the locket, opened it, looked at the terrified face of the young woman. He felt a deep, chilling connection to her suffering. Days turned into weeks. Elias stopped eating properly. He stopped showering. His apartment became a mess. He didn't answer his phone. He just sat, staring. The locket clutched in his hand. He started talking to the woman in the photograph, whispering to her, telling her he understood, that he felt her pain. He knew what it was like to be trapped, to be unheard. His employers called. Then they stopped. He didn't care. He had a new purpose. He was with her now, with all of them. The patients of Blackwood Asylum. They were no longer alone. And neither was he. One night he stood by his window, looking out at the city lights. He felt a profound sense of peace. The cold was no longer chilling. It was comforting. The whispers were no longer terrifying. They were familiar, welcoming. He smiled. A thin, unsettling smile. He closed his eyes. He could see Blackwood Asylum. Not the crumbling building, but the asylum as it once was. Full of life. Full of pain. Full of people. And he was one of them. He was home. The night watchman's descent was complete. He had become part of the asylum's silent, enduring population. The job was simple. Night watchman. Abandoned building. Blackwood Asylum. Elias Vance had taken it because the pay was good. More than good. It was enough to ignore the whispers, the local legends about the place. He was a practical man. A former Marine. He believed in what he could see. What he could touch. Ghosts were for movies. His shift started at 2200 hours. 10 hours of patrolling empty corridors. Checking windows. Ensuring no trespassers. The building was vast. 3 main wings. A central administration block. A network of tunnels in the basement. It had been closed for 40 years. Left to rot. The air inside was cold even in summer. It smelled of damp concrete, mildew, and something else. A faint, cloying sweetness. Like old flowers. Or formaldehyde. Elias carried a heavy-duty flashlight. A 2-way radio. A set of keys. He wore thick boots. A heavy coat. The silence was the hardest part. A profound, echoing silence that swallowed sound. His own footsteps seemed unnaturally loud. His breathing, a harsh rasp in the stillness. The first few nights were uneventful. Monotonous. He walked his rounds. Checked the locks. Noted the peeling paint. The broken glass. The overturned furniture. The asylum was a shell. A decaying monument to forgotten suffering. He saw nothing out of the ordinary. Heard nothing but the creak of the old building settling. The distant howl of the wind through broken windows. Then the sound started. subtle at first. A faint scraping from the upper floors. Like something being dragged. He'd stop. Listen. The sound would cease. He'd dismiss it. Rats. Or the wind. The building was old. It made noises. One night, patrolling the east wing, he heard a distinct moan. Oh, guttural. It seemed to come from one of the padded cells. Room 214. He stopped outside the heavy steel door. His flashlight beam played over the rusted hinges. The small, barred window. He listened. The moan came again. Fainter this time. More like a sigh. He tried the handle. Locked. Of course. All the cells were locked. He pressed his ear to the cold metal. Nothing. Just the silence. He told himself it was the ventilation system. Or his imagination. The isolation was getting to him. He started noticing things. Small things. A door he was certain he had closed, now slightly ajar. A chair he had seen overturned, now upright. He'd retrace his steps. Double-check. He was tired. Working nights did that. He was probably just forgetting. Or misremembering. The smells intensified. That cloying sweetness. Sometimes it was overpowering. Like 100 bouquets left to rot. Other times it was replaced by a sharp, metallic tang. Like blood. Fresh blood. He'd sniff the air. Look for a source. Nothing. The building was empty. His sleep began to suffer. He'd wake suddenly. Convinced he heard something. A faint whisper. A distant scream. He'd lie in bed, staring at the ceiling, listening to the silence of his own apartment. He was tired. That was all. One night, he was in the old hydrotherapy room in the basement. A vast tiled space. Empty tubs. Rusted equipment. It was always colder down there. He was checking the pipes. His flashlight beam swept across the far wall. And then he saw it. A shadow. Tall. Thin. It moved quickly. Darted behind one of the old treatment chairs. Elias froze. His heart hammered against his ribs. He swung his flashlight. The shadow was gone. Just the empty, tiled room. He walked slowly towards where he had seen it. Nothing. No place for anyone to hide. The room was bare. He told himself it was his own shadow. Or the flickering of his flashlight. The battery was getting low. He made a mental note to replace it. But the image of that shadow, its swift, unnatural movement, stayed with him. He started carrying a small digital camera. Just in case. He told himself it was for documenting trespassers. Or structural damage. But deep down he knew it was for something else. Something he couldn't name. The sounds became more distinct. Footsteps. Shuffling. From the floor above him. When he was on the first floor, he'd hear them on the second. When he was on the second, he'd hear them on the third. Always just out of reach. Always just beyond his line of sight. He'd call out. Hello? Anyone there? Only the silence would answer. One night, he was in the old children's ward. Small rooms. Faded murals on the walls. A rocking horse, broken, lay on its side. He heard a soft, rhythmic humming. Like a lullaby. It came from one of the rooms. Room 307. He approached slowly. His hand on his service pistol. He knew it was useless against whatever this was. But it was a comfort. He pushed the door open. The room was empty. Just the rocking horse. The faded murals. But the humming. It was louder now. Filling the room. It seemed to come from the rocking horse itself. She started seeing things. Not clearly. Just glimpses. Fleeting movements in her peripheral vision. A white gown disappearing around a corner. A face pressed against a grimy window. Gone the moment she looked directly. She told herself she was tired. Overworked. But the images were too vivid. Too persistent. Her sleep began to suffer. She'd wake suddenly. Convinced she heard a distant scream. A child's cry. She'd lie in her bed, staring at the ceiling, listening to the silence of her own apartment. She was no longer alone. The asylum had followed her home. She found herself drawn to the architect's personal notes. Tucked away in a dusty box. Uncatalogued. The architect, a man named Arthur Penhest, had designed the asylum in the late 1800s. His notes were meticulous. Obsessive. He had a fascination with acoustics. With sound. He believed that the very structure of a building could influence the mind. Could calm. Or could disturb. Evelyn read through his journals. His entries grew increasingly erratic. He wrote of the whispers in the walls. Of the voices of the suffering. He believed the asylum was a living entity. That it absorbed the pain of its inhabitants. And that it never truly let them go. His final entry was chilling. A single sentence. They're all here. They never left. He had committed suicide in the asylum's central tower, the very building he had designed. The next day, Evelyn returned to Penhest. She went directly to the west wing, to the mural, to the wall where she had heard the scratching. She placed her hand against the cold plaster. The cold was immediate, bone deep, and then she felt it, a faint vibration, a rhythmic tapping, coming from within the wall. She pulled out her camera, started recording. She pressed her ear to the wall again. The whispers were louder now, clear. A cacophony of overlapping voices. Agony, despair, and one voice, distinct, a child's voice, crying. Evelyn stumbled back, her mind reeling. This was not a draft, not a pipe. This was something else, something beyond her understanding. She looked at the mural, at the distorted figures, their empty eyes. She felt a profound sense of dread, of pity. She spent the rest of the day in a trance, walking the corridors. The sounds were everywhere now. Footsteps, moans, laughter, cries. The asylum was alive, filled with the echoes of its past. She saw the figures now, clearly. Fleeting glimpses of white gowns, gaunt faces. They moved silently, observing her, passing through walls. She felt no fear, only a strange sense of resignation. She was no longer an observer. She was part of it. As dusk settled, casting long, skeletal shadows through the broken windows, Evelyn found herself in the central administration block. At the architect's desk, Arthur Penhest's desk, she sat in his chair. The wood was cold, impossibly cold. She looked at the blueprints spread before her, the intricate lines, the precise measurements. She saw them differently now. Not just a building, but a cage, a trap, designed to hold not just bodies but souls. She picked up a pen. Her hand trembled. She began to write in the margins of the old blueprints, her handwriting mirroring Arthur Penhest's increasingly erratic script. She wrote of the whispers, of the cold, of the faces in the shadows. She wrote of the children, their cries, their endless pain. She felt a presence behind her, a cold breath on her neck. She didn't turn. She knew who it was. Arthur, the architect. He was there, guiding her hand, sharing his obsession. The sun set. The asylum plunged into darkness. Evelyn continued to write, her pen scratching against the brittle paper. The whispers grew louder, a chorus of voices, welcoming her into their eternal silence. The architect's obsession had become her own. She had found the stories in the walls, and the walls had claimed her. She never left Penhest. She became another lingering echo, another silent witness to the asylum's enduring horror. The old blueprints were brittle, their edges frayed. The ink faded to a ghostly brown. Dr. Evelyn Reed traced a finger along the labyrinthine corridors of what was once the Penhest State School and Hospital. Penhest, a name synonymous with neglect, abuse, and for some lingering despair. Evelyn was an architectural historian. Her specialty was forgotten institutions, buildings with stories. Penhest was a library of screams. She had secured a grant, access to the untouched archives, decades of patient files, staff logs, and the original architectural plans. Her goal was to document the evolution of asylum design, to understand how these places, built with intentions of healing, became monuments to human suffering. She was a woman of logic, of empirical data. She believed in the tangible, the measurable. Her research began in the university library. Microfilms, bound volumes. The official records painted a grim picture: overcrowding, understaffing, primitive treatments. But the unofficial accounts, the whispered histories, those were what truly haunted her. Stories of patients left in their own filth, of unseen hands, of voices from empty rooms. Evelyn dismissed them as folklore, the natural consequence of such a dark history. After months of archival work, she gained permission for on-site access. The building itself was vast, imposing, a sprawling complex of brick and stone. It had been closed for over 30 years, left to the elements, and to the shadows. Her first visit was in the autumn. The air was crisp. The trees around the asylum grounds were skeletal, their branches clawing at the gray sky. The silence on the grounds was absolute. A heavy, unnatural silence, broken only by the crunch of her boots on fallen leaves. She entered through the main administration building. The grand entrance hall was choked with dust, debris. Sunlight struggled through grimy windows, illuminating dust motes dancing in the stale air. The scale of the place was overwhelming. Miles of corridors. Hundreds of rooms. Each one a potential repository of forgotten pain. She spent weeks there, alone, methodically documenting each wing, each floor. She carried a powerful flashlight, a camera, a voice recorder. Her notes were meticulous. Measurements, photographs, observations on decay. She was detached, professional. She had to be, to maintain objectivity. The first anomaly was subtle. A faint, almost imperceptible smell, like old roses, and something else, something sickly sweet, like decay. It would appear suddenly, linger, then vanish. She attributed it to stagnant air, old upholstery, the natural decomposition of an abandoned building. Then came the sounds, distant, indistinct, a faint whimpering, a low, guttural moan, always from a floor above, or a wing she had not yet explored. She'd stop, listen. The sounds would cease. She'd rationalize it. The wind, the building settling, animal noises. The asylum was vast. It made noises. She began to feel a sense of presence. Not threatening, not malevolent, just there. A feeling of being watched, of not being alone. She turned suddenly, her flashlight beam cutting through the gloom. Nothing. Just empty corridors. Broken windows. She told herself it was the isolation. The power of suggestion. She was spending too much time alone in this place. One afternoon she was in the West Wing. The patient dormitories. Long rooms. Rows of rusted bed frames. She was photographing a particularly unsettling mural. A child's drawing. Distorted figures. Huge empty eyes. As she focused her camera she heard it. A soft, rhythmic scratching. Coming from behind the wall. Directly behind the mural. Evelyn froze. Her heart rate quickened. She lowered her camera. Listen. The scratching continued. Faint. Persistent. Like fingernails on plaster. She pressed her ear to the cold, damp wall. The sound was clearer now, and it was accompanied by a faint, desperate whispering. Too indistinct to understand. Too close to ignore. She backed away slowly, her mind racing. This was not the wind. This was not the building settling. This was something else. Something she could not explain. She tried to rationalize it. A trapped animal. A faulty pipe. But the whispers, they were human. She left the West Wing, her composure shaken. She spent the rest of the day in the administration building. The familiar scent of old paper and dust a comfort. She tried to focus on her blueprints. But the scratching, the whispers, they echoed in her mind.